Hello, in this video I want to discuss a bit about GraphQL because recently I recorded a video about API testing. And nowadays we are seeing GraphQL more and more. It is becoming more popular. And whenever we have a system that we are supposed to test, which is developed with GraphQL, let's understand how we can test and let's understand the basic working principles for a GraphQL. So this is the official site for GraphQL, and let's understand what it means basically. So whenever we see the description, GraphQL is a query language for APIs. So what is the basic difference between the other protocols like REST or SOAP? In the others, we were sending some queries to the endpoints, right? And we were getting the responses. So of course it is the same principle. So we will send some questions, send some queries to the APIs, and we will get the answers or the responses. But the basic difference will be it will be some uh, including some queries, like maybe even some filtering we can think. Because in REST, we will just send the query and we will get the response with including all the entities inside the objects. But this time, whenever we are using GraphQL, we will send which fields we are interested in the request itself, and in the response, we will get the relevant context. Like if there is an object having too many fields. Like let's suppose we have a car object. Car has lots of different information, like for example, the brand, the year, the price, maybe even different features like color, model, lots of different things. If I'm interested only in the brands of the car that I have, then I don't want to get all the other details because it will be a huge response. So I want to get rid of this network traffic and I want to have all the cars, but only with the brands, not all the other irrelevant details. I'm not interested in those. So this I can do with GraphQL. In the request itself, I will say that I'm interested only in this field, so please return me only that relevant response. So let's see how it works. First of all, I found an example uh, GraphQL application that we can use. So let me show you what it is. It is this one. This is just a Star Wars API. So let's start working on this. And I have my Postman here. So we will start sending our queries. Cool, exciting. So let's start with our first request. So let's understand how it looks like. For example, first of all, this is the documentation page itself. So we can already understand what kind of queries we will do. In the first site, I can understand maybe we can query about the film, Star Wars films, and in the response, I will see the films with different information, like the car example. Like in this case, I will get the information about the title, the director, the release date, and species connection information of the films. But if I'm not interested in the director, I can delete this from my request. So in the response, I will not have the director information about the films. So let's see in our practical Postman example. So this is the URL that I'll use. So let's start by putting this. That is my URL. Cool. And I will have some body and I will use GraphQL, right? This is different than the others. It will not be either row or any other form, but it will be a GraphQL form. Cool. And what kind of queries I can do? For example, I can search the schema of this API. Like it shows me what kind of objects there are. Like I can see all films, all people, all planets. There are several objects. Like film is an object, and inside film there are several fields. Like the created information, the director field, episode ID, the ID of the movie or ID of the film, a producer, and these are the fields of film object. Cool. These are all the objects that I can use. And what else? For example, in the Explorer tab, I can see the queries. So, for example, I can query all films. how I can understand, I can use all films. This is just like the endpoint corresponding to the REST query, right? Because in REST query, what would I do? I would perform a GET request to the all films endpoint. When I call all films endpoint with a GET request, I would have all films context, right? So let's do the same. So yes, this is all films. It will have a films connection type. So cool. But actually, let's just try this. All right. Can I zoom in here? Yes, I can. And all right. Actually, let me just try. Well, let's see what happens. Oh, cool. I already have some response here. So let's see what is inside. Okay, I have all films. Films are here. How many are there? I guess there are 6 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes. So, what kind of response I had? The film's information, including the IDs of those and the title, right? So, because this is what I requested from the server. For example, if I don't care about the ID of the film, what will I have? I will have only the title. So this is why it is a query language for the APIs. And what else I can use in my request? Like let's say again, the schema of this API in the films, I used ID, I used, what was the other one? Title, right? Yeah, title. What is here? So for example, I can add release date as well. Let's see. Yes, now I have release date as well. So I guess this is the first movie. 77, 80 is the second, 83, 99, 2002, 2005. There are 6 Star Wars movies. Very cool. So we already see what kind of queries we can do. All right. So if I, for example, put a wrong field, I mean, a field which does not exist in the schema, what will happen? For example, I will query about the length of the movie. All right. But cannot query field length, right? Because there is no length in the schema. Let's see again. I'm already inside the film object. In the object, is there a length field? There is nothing like that. So if I put, I will of course have an error, which is 400 bet request, right? This is what we expect. But even before I send my request, I can already understand it will not work. How? Because, for example, I can see the error here. Cannot query field length on type film, right? But let me delete this and let me add another one like duration. Even before I send my request, I can see the error here. Cannot query field duration on type film. How Postman understand this? Because whenever I type my URL, it can already fetch the schema from this URL. Like if I select this auto fetch, then I can already see it is already fetched. So it already knows, the Postman already gets this information, gets the schema and the structure of all the objects and the fields. So since it already knows all the fields which are available under film, it knows that duration is not there. So it already warns me that I cannot use this. Cool. So this was the auto fetching option. So let's proceed. So we see the data structure that we are sending in our query here. But how about these keywords, right? Films and the query, what are they? So this query, the first keyword, is the operation type that we are doing. So we will use basically two operation types, which are the query and the mutation. So query is for read-only operations. When I'm sending a query, it means I'm trying to retrieve some data or information from the server side. But if I'm sending a mutation request, then it means I'm doing a write operation. I want a server to update some data in the server side. It just corresponds to the put, patch, or post queries in the REST APIs, right? So now let's proceed with query, and the films is the operation name. So, but it is even optional, so I can remove this, and I see it is still running in this way without any name. And even if I remove this query, the operation type, by default, it is sending the query type operation. So it is just a shorthand notation for the query operation types. But of course, just not to confuse anything, let's just add this. And with a reasonable name, we can understand what kind of operation we are doing here. So what are we doing now? We are getting all the films, right? All right, let's name in a logical way. Even the request name we can do reasonably, like get all films. Okay, this is our first request. So we already know now the operation names and the operation types. So I want to show you one more thing which I saw in the schema when I was investigating, which is here the arguments, right? For example, I see some arguments here. Other than the object, there are some arguments. For example, in the I'm in the film object now. In some fields, I see some details like after, before, first, last. Actually, these are the arguments. So let's see. For example, first. First argument applies to all these fields. Whenever I'm performing these queries, I can use this argument with an integer value. So it will return the first certain number of entities in my response. If I add to my request, let's try. So under the film, I can use this first argument. So under all films, I can use. So whenever I start typing, you see it is an auto suggestion option. So I will use first and with an integer value, right? Let's try 2, for example. So normally before adding this argument, I had 6 films. Now I have only 2. Very cool. Let's try another one. Like, let's see, ID, for example. ID is not applicable for the film collection. So let's search in the all collection. So it's applicable for a film query. For a film query, I can add either ID or film. So here I'm querying all films, right? With the films field. So to query film, let's create another request. Here, let's copy this URL. Actually, we could even define a variable for this, not to duplicate each time, right? Yeah, we can do it later, but now what I'll do is I will just query a film, get a film. Very cool. How I'm doing that, I will just add my fields that I need here. Okay, film. And inside film, what kind of fields I can use? Let's see. Okay, this is already the film object, so I can maybe get its release date. All right, I think it is ready. So let's save it here. What is the request name? Get a film. By the way, we can send this as a post or a get query for the query type operations. Let's try. And I get a response which says that you must provide an ID or a film ID. This is what I expect. I wanted to see. So I have to provide an argument here, which will include either ID or the film ID. So here I already know the IDs, right? So let's copy one of them and add here as an argument. Yes, I already see I can use either. So let's go with ID. And I guess it will be in a string format, right? What was it? ID. Let me again find the argument. Okay, actually it has its own type. ID should be in ID type. All right. Okay, I think this was the ID that I get from the other request. So let's try now. Cool. Now I have the relevant film and the release date. So I can even add the title of the film so I can understand which one it is. Oops. Where did my Postman go? It's here. It is the A New Hope. Is it the first one? I think it was the first one. Yes. All right. So now we know adding arguments as well. So let's see how we can add some variables. Because in my Postman query, I see I have my request body here, and there are some variables. So let's see how I can utilize this variable field. For example, let me copy this. And now this time I will do the same query with a variable. Very cool. So now I will perform this operation. This is my operation, right? This is get a film. That is the name of my operation. So I will perform this operation by providing an input. Like for example, I will pass what I'll pass. I'll pass the ID of the film, right? So ID of the film. Okay. And what was its type? It was has its own type, right? Which was ID. Cool. And whenever I perform this query with the relevant variable, then I can pass. By the way, I didn't save this. I can pass this variable to here as an argument, which will be ID, which will be this variable. All right. Before I'm using that, like here, let me delete. I was getting an error, right? It was saying you are trying to use a variable, but it is not used in the request. So now I'm passing a variable here. I mean, I will pass, and when I pass, I will use it inside my request, like this, which will be the ID of this film. The ID of this film will be this variable. Previously, I just hard coded in my request, right? This one is just stable, just using a static ID. But now I can change my variable externally. How? Like whenever I'm performing this query from any platform, like maybe from my code, then I can pass the variable that I want to use as the title. But now in the Postman, I can just pass my variables from here on the right frame. My variables are what I'm using. I'm using the ID of the film, right? ID of the film. I'm using this variable. What will I use? I will use this value. Okay. And maybe I can have some more variables as well, like, I don't know. Director, expected comma. All right. Not important than you. All right. So I'm passing two variables to my operation, but my operation will use only one of them, will not use the other one. But I can use the other one as well whenever needed, right? But for now, I will use just the ID of the film. So I'm passing from here as an argument and as a parameter, and this parameter variable is accepted by the operation, and inside my request, it is used as an argument for my request. Let's see what happens now. Yay, the same film is returned from my request. One more little information about the variables. Just like we do in the programming languages that we are using in automation code, we can set some default variables. Like if somehow it is not passed as a parameter, then we can just set a default variable like this one. If I'm not passing externally, then I will use this one as the default value. Like, let's remove this here. Now it will still work. So this is the default variable. And about the type of the argument or the variable, if we know that it cannot be passed null, which means it is if it is non-nullable, then we just add an exclamation mark here to let users know that it should be passed. It's a mandatory field. Cool. I guess this is pretty much it about the variables. Now we know how to use variables with default values and by making them non-nullable. Let's discuss aliases as well. Cool. Now I will do another query. Let me just first, let's save this. Let's duplicate this. All right. Actually, this was not getting all films anymore. It was getting two films, right? It was getting first two films because I have an argument here. Cool. Now what I want to do is I will query two films, but not the first two. Okay, I will query two separate films. How can I do that? Since in the all films, all the arguments that I can use are first, last. What was the others? Let's see. First, last. Let's go to the object again. First, last, before and after, right? But for example, I want to have the first and the fifth. So what should I do now? I can't use this query anymore. So I will get just one film. Okay. And in this film, let's remove this. I want to see first and the fifth, right? So, okay, this is the first. Cool. This is the first. And I want to see the fifth. So now the ID should be what? The ID should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the fifth one. Now the film with this ID will return the film number 5. All right. And the first film, I'm interested in title. In the fifth, I'm interested in the year. What was it? Publisher? Release date. Okay. Cool. I'm ready. I can send the query, right? But I can already see some errors here, warnings. What does it say? Fields film conflict because they have different arguments. Use different aliases to the fields to fetch both. If this was intentional, yes, it is intentional. I want to get both of them, but it says that they have different arguments. So Postman is a little bit confused, right? It doesn't understand what I'm trying to do. Are you doing something intentional, or you are somehow just confusing things? No, I'm not confusing things. I am doing this intentionally. Dear Postman, don't worry. I know what I do. But it says that if you are querying the film with some different arguments or different fields, then there's something not expected. So I will just use aliases. So this one, the first film, will be my first query, which will be the first film, right? And the next is the fifth film. Okay, so this first film and the fifth film are my aliases. So this time, in this case, I can do the same object query with even differing uh, arguments or even different fields. So let's see what happens now. Yeah, very cool. So I have two films. The first one, I can see the title, and the second one, which is the fifth film, I can see the release date. All right. Let's rename our request and then we will move on to fragments. This was the usage of alias, right? Cool. All right, let's discuss about fragments, which might be interpreted as the methods, which is corresponding to the methods that we are using in our code base. So what I will do here is like, let me again Like maybe okay, let's use this one. So let's duplicate this and let's do it with fragment. Cool. So some part of the request I can export to a fragment. Like for example, this part. Let's cut here and let's introduce that part as a fragment. Fragment. This was doing what? This was getting a film detail. Film detail fragment. This can be executed on root object. So let's move our request part, which I cut, to here. Okay, now this is just like a method that I can exclude or call from my main request. So let's just call it. How can I call it? I'll put 3 dots and now the fragment that I want to use. This one. That's it. I think that's it. Yes, I can already use it. And one more thing. Again, I will duplicate this and I will use this fragment as an inline fragment. Again, like corresponding to the inline methods that we are using in our code base. We can introduce this as an inline fragment, which will be like, oops, I didn't save. Let's save all of this. Not to lose anything. Okay. Now I will use this one, but this fragment I will use inside the query, inside my operation. So I will not introduce this fragment externally, but whenever I want to call or I want to execute my fragment, I just put what I want to do. Save, execute. Yes, it is still working. Cool. This is an inline fragment. But so far, did it make sense? I think not too much, right? Why I'm doing this? Because normally, if I'm having duplicated a code, then I can use this just to avoid duplication. So let's try to do one usage, like for example, here, for example, I have two queries, right? If it is duplicating, like, let me duplicate this request itself. Now, for example, if I was having a duplicated operation like release date, there was a director field in the film, right? Yes. What else? Species connection. I think this is an object. We should add some subfields. Yes, that's correct. Even this is an object. Yeah. And okay, I think it's ready. So if I wanna do the same here for the next film, which is the film number 5, now it is working in this way, right? It is getting all the relevant information that I need. Because again and again I'm repeating myself, but GraphQL, as we see here, is just ask for what you need and get exactly that. Like if I query for the name is here. If I add height, it is there. So whatever I'm asking for is in the response. So it will not return anything else. I will specify the context of the response. This is the beauty of GraphQL. This is the beauty of making a query. Let's go back to our Postman collection. So now I don't want to duplicate this, right? I'm uh, introducing this field collection 2 times. So just introduce this as a fragment. How was it? I would just introduce a fragment here. This is get film details. For example, this part. So now I can just call this fragment. Yes. And instead of duplicating, just call the fragment. But I have some errors which says all film details, not all films. Okay, but I still have some problems here. What does it say? Yes, I'm trying to execute this fragment on root object, but normally these fields are applicable to a film, right? Not to root object. I can execute this query on a film. Like if I want to get the title of a root object, it will not return anything. But if I want to get the title of a film, of course it can work. Yes. Now it makes sense. Because what was our previous example? In our previous example, I was having a film. From the root object, I can get a film, right? Just under the root, there are lots of films as a list. But a film itself is a main object which can be queried from the root. But title is not a main object. It is just a subfield of a film. So I can execute this fragment on a film object. Let's see if it is working now. Yay, it works. This is the first film. And this is the fifth film. I could query by avoiding duplicating all the subfields by introducing a fragment.